the button that should not exist. Every building is designed around certainty. Concrete knows where it stands. Steel knows how high it can rise. And elevators, perhaps the most trusted machines in modern life, exist to move us between clearly defined points. Floor to floor, number to number, nothing in between. This building follows those rules. 40 floors, no basement, no underground parking, no service levels hidden below ground. The architectural plans are precise, reviewed, and approved decades ago. According to every official document, there is no floor below level 1, and yet sometimes the elevator panel disagrees. It doesn't happen every day. It doesn't happen in every elevator, and it never happens when someone is looking for it. Witnesses describe the same moment: a brief flicker in the panel's backlight, a soft electronic chime that doesn't belong to any known system alert. Then, where there was once empty metal, there is a button, small, unlabeled except for 2 characters, Moi 1, not scratched in, not taped over, not crudely installed. It looks original, as if it has always been part of the elevator, simply waiting to be noticed. Maintenance logs show no record of installation. Security footage shows no technician opening the panel. In fact, when reviewed frame by frame, the button doesn't appear at all. It's simply there. Most people don't press it. They assume it's a malfunction, a reflection, a trick of tired eyes. Some blink, look again, and find the button gone, leaving behind the unsettling feeling that they imagined the whole thing. But a few do press it, not out of bravery, out of curiosity or boredom, or the quiet, dangerous belief that nothing truly strange ever happens to ordinary people. The elevator accepts the input immediately. No error sound, no resistance. And that's when something feels wrong. The elevator doesn't jerk downward. The familiar sensation of descent never comes. There is no acceleration, no deceleration. Instead, there is stillness. A stillness so complete that riders later struggle to describe it, not as stopping, but as being held. As if the space inside the elevator has been gently removed from the building itself. The floor indicator doesn't change. The numbers don't scroll. Time seems to hesitate. Some report a faint pressure in their ears. Others describe a sudden emotional weight, an unplaceable sense of déjà vu, like remembering something they never lived. Then, after a duration no one agrees on, seconds, minutes longer, the doors begin to open. And by the time they do, one truth becomes unavoidable. This elevator did not take them down. It took them somewhere that was never meant to be part of the building at all. When the button appears. The button never appears when it would be convenient. It does not show itself during busy morning hours, when the elevators are crowded and monitored. It does not appear during inspections, safety drills, or maintenance checks. It waits for moments of inattention, times when people are tired, distracted, or alone. Most sightings occur late at night. Security guards on overnight shifts report noticing it sometime after midnight, usually while riding alone between floors. Office workers staying late describe seeing it after long hours, when the building has fallen into a low mechanical hum and the city outside has gone quiet. Residents returning home at unusual hours notice it after the day has already worn them thin. The pattern, if there is one, seems tied less to time and more to state of mind. Witnesses often mention exhaustion, stress, emotional distraction, a sense of being on autopilot. Several recall that they weren't even thinking about where they were going when they noticed the change in the panel. Their eyes simply landed on it, on the space where there had never been anything before. And once seen, it is impossible to ignore. The elevator panel is familiar territory. People know it without thinking. The layout of numbers, the emergency phone, the door controls. A new element doesn't just stand out. It disrupts a mental map that has been memorized through repetition. That is why many witnesses initially assume something is wrong with them. They blink, they look away, they rub their eyes. The button remains. It does not flash. It does not glow brighter than the others. It simply exists, perfectly aligned, perfectly manufactured, matching the panel's age and wear as if it has been pressed thousands of times. Some describe a subtle sensation the moment it appears. A soft electrical click, too quiet to be sure it happened. A brief drop in air pressure. A faint ringing, like the echo left behind after a loud sound, but without the sound itself. Others feel nothing at all. What they all agree on is this: the button never announces itself. There is no dramatic reveal, no sudden transformation. The elevator does not malfunction. The lights do not flicker violently. Reality does not break. It simply shifts, just enough to be noticed. Security cameras add another layer of unease. When footage from the elevators is reviewed, the recordings show no change. In video playback, the panel remains normal. No one button visible, no distortion, no glitch. Even when the witness is clearly seen pressing a spot below the one button, their finger appears to touch empty metal. Yet the elevator responds. Doors close. Movement begins, or something like movement. Technicians have tried to recreate the phenomenon. They run elevators overnight. They cut power briefly. They simulate voltage drops and software resets. Nothing works. The button does not appear on command. It does not respond to observation. In fact, some guards claim that actively watching the panel seems to prevent it entirely, as if attention itself disrupts whatever condition allows the button to exist. More unsettling still is how the button behaves once it appears. It does not stay long. Some witnesses say it vanishes the moment the elevator stops at the next floor. Others report that it disappears as soon as someone refuses to press it. A few claim they watched it fade, not flicker out, but lose relevance, as if the mind simply stopped registering it. Several people only realize it was gone after the doors open, and when they try to describe its exact position later, they struggle. It was below one, they say, but not where a basement button should be, like it was squeezed into a space that wasn't meant for anything. One guard, after seeing it 3 times over 2 years, offered a different description. It felt less like a button, he said, and more like an invitation. What makes the phenomenon especially disturbing is its selectivity. Thousands of people use the elevators every week. Only a handful ever see the button. And among those who do, not all see it the same way. Some recall it being slightly recessed. Others insist it was flush with the panel. A few remember the label as dim, almost hesitant, like the elevator itself wasn't sure it should be displaying it. There is no single trigger, no shared demographic, no common floor, destination, or schedule. The only recurring detail is the moment itself. A pause, a mental gap, a brief suspension of routine, as if the building waits for a second of human inattention, then reveals something it normally keeps hidden. Not a malfunction, not a prank, not a glitch, but a reminder that the systems we trust are built on assumptions, that the spaces we move through every day may contain margins we never notice, and that sometimes when the world thinks no one is really looking, a door opens, a button appears, and a choice is quietly offered. Not everyone notices it. Not everyone presses it. But once you've seen the button that should not exist, you begin to wonder how many other parts of reality are only visible when we stop paying attention to the rules. The ride down. The moment the Mesh 1 button is pressed, the elevator responds the way it always has. The doors slide shut with a familiar mechanical certainty. The soft chime sounds. The car seals itself off from the hallway. At first, nothing feels different. This is important because it is the delay that unsettles people the most. There is no immediate drop, no lurch, no sense of acceleration pulling at the stomach. The elevator does not behave like a machine beginning a descent. Instead, it settles into a stillness so complete that many riders briefly assume it has malfunctioned. But the doors are closed, the panel remains lit, and the emergency phone stays silent. The elevator is working. It just isn't moving in a way the body recognizes. Several witnesses describe the sensation as being suspended, though not in space. Others struggle to find language for it at all. One man said it felt like standing in a paused moment, like time had been asked to wait politely for a second longer than usual. The floor indicator doesn't change. The numbers do not scroll downward. They do not flicker. They do not reset. The display simply holds its last known truth. And slowly, subtly, that truth begins to feel unreliable. People report an odd pressure behind the eyes, as if depth perception has shifted slightly out of alignment. Sounds become strangely flat. The hum of the cables, the whisper of air through vents. These noises don't disappear, but they lose direction, as though they're coming from everywhere at once. Some notice their reflection in the mirrored walls no longer lines up quite right. Not distorted, not warped, just delayed. Blinking doesn't fix it. Looking away doesn't either. The reflection mirrors every movement perfectly, yet still feels like it belongs to a version of the self that is half a second out of sync. Then there is the quiet. Not silence, but a thinning of sound, as if the elevator has been wrapped in insulation thicker than steel. Voices, when spoken, come out smaller than expected, quickly swallowed by the space. More than one person reports starting to say something, anything, only to stop halfway through, unsettled by how wrong their own voice sounds. And beneath it all, a new sensation emerges. Recognition. Not recognition of a place or an event, but of a state, a subtle emotional familiarity that arrives without context, like remembering how something feels without remembering when it happened. Several writers describe a sudden rush of images that aren't quite memories. A hand resting on a table they've never owned, a street corner they've never walked down, a voice calling their name in a tone they've never heard before. These impressions don't play like visions. They don't unfold in sequence. They arrive whole, heavy, and intimate, then recede just as quickly, leaving behind a faint ache. The elevator still hasn't moved, or perhaps it has, but movement is no longer the right word. Physiological responses vary. Heart rates increase and some others experience the opposite, a strange calm that borders on detachment. One woman reported feeling as if her body had already accepted whatever was about to happen, even though her mind hadn't caught up. Time becomes difficult to measure. Some say the ride lasted only a few seconds. Others insist it stretched into minutes. Security timestamps are useless. Cameras continue recording at a normal frame rate, capturing a motionless elevator car with occupants standing perfectly still. There is no visible anomaly, no distortion, no blackout, no skipped frames. Yet when riders later estimate the duration, their accounts rarely align. What they all agree on is the moment just before arrival. There is no deceleration, no sense of approaching a destination. Instead, there is a shift, soft, internal, and deeply unsettling. Like crossing a boundary that offers no resistance, like passing through a doorway without ever seeing the door. Several riders report a sudden certainty at this point, not fear, not panic, certainty, a quiet, instinctive understanding that whatever lies ahead is not part of the building's architecture, that the elevator has not failed but succeeded perfectly in doing something it was never meant to do. Then the lights change. Not flickering off, not dimming, but adjusting, recalibrating themselves to a new context. The color temperature feels wrong, too neutral, too even. Shadows soften until they almost disappear. And finally, the doors begin to open. The sound is identical to every other stop the elevator has ever made. The same motor, the same rhythm, the same reassuring mechanical whisper. That is what disturbs people most, because everything about the ride suggests interruption, deviation, impossibility. But the elevator behaves as if nothing unusual has occurred at all, as if this destination, whatever it is, has always been part of its route. As the doors part, most riders experience one final sensation before they see what's waiting on the other side. A brief, powerful thought that does not feel like their own. You are early, or sometimes you were not supposed to remember the ride. And in that moment, standing in a space that is no longer quite an elevator, but not yet something else, many realize the truth too late. The ride down was never about distance, it was about separation, about gently removing a person from the assumptions that normally anchor them to the world they know. The elevator didn't take them below the building, it took them away from it. And whatever waits beyond the doors has been waiting far longer than the building itself. The floor that doesn't exist. The doors open slowly, the way they always do. There is no dramatic reveal, no sudden rush of air, no sense of crossing a threshold. And that is the first thing that feels wrong. Every elevator opens into a space that announces itself immediately. An office lobby, a hallway, a parking level, something that explains where you are. This place does not. It offers no context, no signage, no cues the mind can grab onto. It is simply there. A corridor stretches forward, straight and evenly lit. The walls are smooth, seamless, and a color that resists description. Not white, not gray, but something in between. as if the material is undecided. The floor reflects light softly, but not enough to act like a mirror. There are no visible seams, no vents, no fixtures that suggest construction methods. It looks finished, but unfinished at the same time. Those who step out of the elevator often hesitate, one foot still inside the car, waiting for instinct to intervene. Many report a strong urge to remain within the elevator, even as curiosity pulls them forward. The sensation is not fear in the usual sense. It is closer to the feeling of standing too close to an edge you didn't notice until it was already beneath your feet. Once fully outside, the elevator doors close behind them without being prompted. Not abruptly, not aggressively, just politely. The sound echoes down the corridor longer than it should, stretching unnaturally before fading into something softer, almost absorbed. When riders turn back, the elevator is gone. Not hidden, not recessed, gone. The wall where it stood is now continuous, unbroken, identical to every other surface. At that moment, most people realize the first unsettling truth. This floor was not designed for entry or exit. It was designed for presence. The corridor extends farther than expected. Perspective behaves strangely here. Walking forward feels effortless, but distance becomes difficult to judge. After several steps, looking back does not produce the expected sense of retreat. The point of origin does not feel farther away. It feels less relevant, as if the concept of behind has begun to loosen. Lighting remains constant. There are no shadows that suggest a light source. The illumination seems to exist independently of fixtures, evenly distributed, eliminating depth cues the human brain relies on to orient itself. Sound behaves differently too. Footsteps are audible but delayed, sometimes arriving half a second after the foot makes contact. Voices, when spoken aloud, sound close even when the speaker is not. Several witnesses recall calling out reflexively, only to feel uncomfortable hearing their words return without direction. The hallway has doors. They are evenly spaced, identical in shape and size. No handles, no hinges, no visible means of opening them. Each door is marked with a faint rectangular outline, as if drawn into the wall rather than attached to it. None are labeled. And yet people feel drawn to specific ones. Not by logic, not by visual difference, by recognition. One man reported stopping in front of a door without knowing why, overcome with a sudden sense of grief. A woman described standing before another door and feeling intense warmth followed by an equally intense regret. Both emotions disconnected from any memory she could place. No one agrees on how many doors there are. Some say dozens. Some say far fewer. A few insist the number changes when you aren't looking. When riders attempt to touch a door, their hand meets resistance, but not solidity. The surface gives slightly, like pressing against a stretched membrane. Several witnesses pulled their hands back immediately, unsettled by the sensation of something yielding without opening. Those who linger begin to notice something else. The walls reflect shapes, not clearly, not consistently, but enough to suggest movement. These reflections do not always match the person standing there. Sometimes they lag, sometimes they move ahead, sometimes they perform actions the person hasn't yet made. Blinking does not reset them, neither does closing one's eyes. One woman described seeing her reflection turn its head before she did. Another claimed the silhouette in the wall briefly appeared older, warier, before snapping back into alignment. Time behaves unpredictably on this floor. Watches continue ticking, but the sense of duration collapses. Minutes feel compressed, then stretched. Thoughts lose sequence. Several people report forgetting why they stepped forward, then remembering again, as if memory itself is buffering. And then there are the sounds, not footsteps, not voices in the usual sense. Something closer to echoes that never belonged to any sound. Whispers without language, emotional impressions without words. Riders often describe hearing their own name spoken in a tone that feels intimate but wrong, not hostile, not welcoming, familiar in a way that suggests long acquaintance. The most disturbing accounts come from those who move deeper into the corridor. The farther one walks, the stronger the sense becomes that this place is not empty, not abandoned, not unfinished. It is occupied, not by bodies, but by traces, residue, possibility. Several witnesses describe moments where the corridor subtly reconfigures, not visibly but emotionally. The air feels heavier in certain sections, lighter in others. Some areas provoke anxiety without cause. Others induce a sudden calm that feels dangerously persuasive. A few people report stopping suddenly, seized by an overwhelming certainty that if they take one more step, they will not be able to return. Not because the path will vanish, but because the desire to leave will. This is where most turn back. Instinct overrides curiosity. Fear finally finds its voice. Those who do attempt to retrace their steps find the corridor unchanged, but not identical. The sense of direction feels less reliable. Some report passing doors they do not remember seeing before. Others insist the hallway feels shorter on the return, compressed like a thought quickly dismissed. The exit, when it reappears, does not announce itself. One moment the wall is continuous. The next, the elevator doors are there again, waiting, silent, unconcerned, no call button, no panel, just the doors, closed. Those who hesitate too long report a growing resistance, not physical but psychological. A subtle pressure that makes standing still feel uncomfortable, like remaining in a room where a conversation has already moved on without you. When the doors finally open, the interior of the elevator looks normal. Too normal. The lights hum the way they always have. The panel displays a familiar floor number. Everything about it insists that nothing unusual has happened. And yet, stepping back inside feels like retreating from something that noticed you. As the doors close, many riders experience one last sensation from the floor that doesn't exist. A quiet disappointment. As if the space beyond the doors had expected more time, or a different choice, or a version of the person who stepped out, one slightly closer to something they were almost ready to remember. Later, when asked to describe the floor, witnesses struggle. They sketch hallways that don't feel accurate. They choose words that fail to capture the atmosphere. They contradict themselves without realizing it. Because the floor that doesn't exist does not behave like a place. It behaves like a margin, a boundary between what is lived and what is possible, between the life you remember and the lives that almost belong to you. And the most unsettling part is this: the floor never forces anyone to stay. It simply offers them something to recognize and waits to see whether recognition will be enough. Those who return. Everyone who steps onto the floor that doesn't exist eventually returns. This is important because it separates the story from rumor. No one has vanished permanently. No names are etched into memorials. No official investigations list missing persons tied to the building. The elevator always brings them back. But return, in this case, does not mean restoration. Those who come back emerge into the building as if nothing unusual has occurred. The elevator doors open onto a familiar floor, an office hallway, a residential corridor, a lobby filled with ordinary noise. The air feels heavier, sounds feel sharper. Gravity seems slightly more insistent. Reality reasserts itself quickly, too quickly. Most riders take a step out of the elevator and pause, struck by a sensation they struggle to explain. The space they've returned to feels smaller than it should, narrower, less flexible, as if the world has tightened around them while they were gone. Security footage captures these moments clearly. People standing still for several seconds, looking around as if something is missing, touching the wall, the railing, their own arms, testing solidity. Then they move on. At first, there are no obvious signs that anything has changed. They go home, they sleep, they wake up. It is only later, sometimes hours, sometimes days, that the differences begin to surface. The first changes are subtle: a misplaced certainty, an unexpected familiarity, a word that comes too easily. One man returned home and opened a drawer he rarely used, convinced he had left something inside. He stood staring at the empty space for several minutes before realizing the memory attached to that action did not belong to his life. A woman reported suddenly knowing the layout of a cafe she had never visited. When she eventually went there weeks later, she navigated directly to the restroom without asking, turning corners with practiced confidence. These moments are easy to dismiss at first: coincidence, imagination, stress. But they accumulate. The memories that surface are not vague impressions or dreamlike fragments. They are detailed, sensory, emotional. They arrive fully formed, complete with context, weight, and consequence. And most unsettling of all, they feel earned. People remember arguments they never had, regrets tied to choices they never made, joy connected to outcomes that never occurred. A recurring theme appears in interviews: grief for things that were never lost. Several individuals describe mourning relationships that do not exist in this reality, partners they never met, children they never had, friends whose names mean nothing to anyone else but feel impossibly important to them. Medical evaluations reveal nothing abnormal. Brain scans show standard activity, no signs of trauma, no neurological explanation. Psychological assessments are equally frustrating. The memories are not delusional. They are internally consistent, emotionally appropriate, and resistant to reframing. Patients are not confused about which life they are living. They are troubled by the fact that they now seem to remember another one just as clearly. Language becomes an unexpected indicator. One man began using idioms common to a region he had never lived in. Another adopted pronunciation patterns inconsistent with his upbringing. A woman startled her coworkers by using technical terminology from a field she had never studied, terms she could not explain but used correctly. When asked how they knew these things, most give the same answer: "I don't know how. I just remember." Sleep becomes difficult. Dreams intensify, not surreal or symbolic, but mundane and specific. People dream of ordinary days and unfamiliar lives, commuting to jobs they don't have, cooking meals in kitchens they don't own, sharing quiet moments with people who do not exist when they wake. Waking up is often accompanied by a brief but crushing sense of displacement. Some describe reaching for someone beside them who isn't there. Others wake mid-sentence, continuing conversations that ended in another world. These dreams do not fade with time. If anything, they sharpen. Relationships begin to strain. Those who return often withdraw, not out of fear, but out of comparison. Friends and family notice changes they can't articulate. The returned listen differently, react strangely to certain topics, display nostalgia for eras or events that hold no significance to anyone else. Several partners report an unsettling shift in intimacy. "It felt like they were remembering someone else while looking at me," one woman said. "Not wishing I was different, just comparing." The returned rarely speak openly about their experience, not because they fear disbelief, but because explanation feels inadequate. Words fail to capture the scale of what was introduced into their minds. How do you describe a life that feels complete but incompatible with the one you're living? Some try. They draw diagrams, they write timelines, they attempt to map one set of memories onto another. None of it aligns. There is overlap, but never a match. The memories do not contradict known history. They diverge from it. Different decisions, different outcomes, the same starting points, subtly altered. This leads to the most disturbing realization reported by those who return. The memories are not random, they are specific to the individual. People do not remember other versions of strangers, they remember other versions of themselves. Lives they might have lived, lives that almost happened, lives shaped by choices they can still remember making, but in another context, under another set of consequences. One man became obsessed with a career he never pursued, driven by a memory of success and fulfillment that felt stolen. A woman found herself inexplicably resentful of a sibling, burdened by a rivalry that never occurred in this world. These emotions do not feel foreign, they feel unresolved. As time passes, a division forms among those who return. Some attempt integration. They treat the memories as curiosities, mental artifacts to be acknowledged but not indulged. Therapy helps some of them. Structure, routine, grounding. Others resist. They fixate. They replay alternate memories repeatedly, chasing the emotional clarity they once had on the floor. They compare every decision, every relationship, every outcome against an invisible standard set by a life that does not exist. These individuals often express a quiet dissatisfaction with reality, not dramatic despair, but a persistence that something is missing, or worse, misplaced. A few attempt to return. They ride the elevators late at night. They wait. They watch the panel. None report seeing the dash one button again. This absence becomes its own source of distress. Because the implication is clear, the floor does not appear on demand. It appears when it chooses, and those who have already been there may no longer be what it is looking for. Years later, follow-up interviews reveal something else, something deeply unsettling. The memories do not degrade. They do not blur or soften. They remain vivid, emotionally charged, and stable over time, unlike normal recollections, which inevitably fade. In contrast, memories of actual lived experiences begin to feel thinner by comparison, not erased, not replaced, but outpaced, as if one set of memories carries more weight than the other. One returned individual summarized it quietly. "It's not that I forgot who I am, it's that I remember who I could have been." And that knowledge, once introduced, cannot be removed. Because the floor that doesn't exist does not steal people. It gives them something far more dangerous. Perspective, a glimpse into the lives they narrowly missed, the choices they almost made, the selves that might still be out there, living, remembering, wondering why they were the ones left behind. Those who return continue living. They go to work, they laugh, they age. But somewhere beneath every ordinary moment, another life hums softly, unresolved, persistent, and painfully familiar. And once you've carried two versions of yourself in the same mind, you never fully belong to either one again. Official explanations. Official explanations begin the way they always do, with paperwork. After the first reports circulate quietly among tenants, building management responds with routine reassurance. Elevators are inspected. Maintenance schedules are reviewed. Notices are posted reminding residents not to tamper with equipment or spread unverified rumors. "There is no -1 floor," the statement reads. "There has never been a -1 floor." All elevator systems are operating within normal parameters. On paper, the matter is closed. The building's architectural plans list 40 floors above ground, no basement, no sublevel, no service access below the foundation. The blueprints are clean, detailed, and stamped by multiple firms across decades of renovations. Every shaft, every support column, every conduit is accounted for. According to these documents, there is no physical space where such a floor could exist. That alone should end the discussion. It doesn't. When pressed further, by residents, by local journalists, by insurance assessors, the explanations grow more technical. Engineers are brought in. Software specialists examine the elevator control systems. Independent inspectors certify that no unauthorized modifications have been made. Their findings are consistent. The elevators are modern, but not advanced enough to generate phantom floors. The control panels are hardwired, not modular. There is no code path that would allow an unlisted button to appear, even temporarily. No logging anomaly suggests phantom inputs or corrupted firmware. When shown testimony describing the one button, technicians offer a familiar explanation: perceptual error, stress, fatigue, expectation bias. Humans are pattern-seeking creatures, especially in familiar environments. Given the right conditions, low lighting, exhaustion, distraction, it is not difficult to imagine seeing something that isn't there. Hallucination does not require illness. Memory does not require accuracy. This explanation is repeated often. It is also insufficient because the elevators respond. Even when video footage shows no visible button, the system registers an input. The doors close. The car enters a state that engineers cannot classify as idle or transit. Power draw changes subtly but measurably. Sensors indicate activity without movement. When asked to explain this, officials shift tone. Now the language becomes careful. They speak of unidentified system behavior, of rare edge cases, of non-reproducible anomalies. They insist these events pose no danger, and perhaps they are telling the truth. No injuries have been reported, no deaths, no missing persons. From a liability standpoint, the situation is manageable. From a public safety standpoint, it is dismissible. From a human standpoint, it is deeply unsettling. When confronted with returning riders, people carrying memories they cannot explain, officials move the conversation into a different domain entirely. Mental health. Psychologists are consulted. Evaluations are offered discreetly. Stress-induced dissociation is suggested. So is cryptomnesia, the phenomenon where forgotten information resurfaces without being recognized as memory. In other words, people know more than they think they know, and sometimes the mind misattributes the source. It's a reasonable theory, until patterns emerge that theory cannot accommodate. Multiple individuals report overlapping memories of places that do not exist. Not identical, but structurally similar. Shared layouts, consistent emotional tones, recurring motifs. None of these places match real locations. None appear in media consumed by the individuals. When clinicians compare notes, they find no shared trauma, no cultural reference point, no obvious psychological trigger. The memories are not invasive, not chaotic, not symptomatic. They are orderly, coherent, integrated into the personality as if they have always been there. At this point, official explanations become defensive. Building management restricts access to elevator footage. Requests are delayed. Interviews are redirected. The tone shifts from reassurance to containment. There is nothing to investigate, a spokesperson says. There is no evidence of wrongdoing or malfunction. Privately, however, the story changes. Internal emails, never intended for release, show growing concern. Not about danger, but about precedent. If one unexplainable feature is acknowledged, what follows? How many assumptions does that undermine? Engineers quietly flag the empty space beneath the building. It appears on the plans as negative volume, a buffer between the foundation and the lowest occupied level. A margin included for structural reasons, never meant to be accessed. Too shallow to be a floor, too deep to be dismissed entirely. It is not a room, but it is not nothing. Officials insist this space is inaccessible. No stairs lead to it, no hatches, no maintenance access. It exists only as an abstract necessity, not a functional area. And yet, elevator shafts pass through it, not stopping, not connecting, passing through. When asked whether an elevator could theoretically stop there, the answer is always the same. In theory, no. When asked whether the elevators ever behave outside theory, the answer becomes less certain. There are meetings where language breaks down entirely. What category does this phenomenon belong to? It is not mechanical failure, not human error, not sabotage. It leaves no trace, causes no damage, violates no safety standards. It simply does something no one planned for. And so officials do what institutions always do in the face of the unclassifiable. They reduce scope. They stop asking what is happening and focus instead on how to respond. Policies are adjusted quietly. Elevators are replaced in phases. Panels are redesigned to eliminate unused space. Software updates remove tolerance for unrecognized inputs. The 9 as 1 button appears less frequently after these changes, but it does not disappear. When it does appear, it behaves the same way it always has. And that becomes the most troubling detail of all, because it suggests that whatever is happening is not a glitch to be patched. It is not emerging from the system. It is interacting with it. At no point do officials consider the possibility that the building is not the origin of the phenomenon. That possibility is never written down, never spoken aloud, because acknowledging it would require redefining responsibility. It would require admitting that some spaces are not entirely governed by design, code, or intent. That some margins once created cannot be fully controlled. In public, the official explanation remains simple. There is no now one floor. There never has been. There never will be. Any reports to the contrary are misunderstandings, coincidences, human error. In private, another understanding settles quietly among those closest to the system. Not fear, not belief, but caution. The elevators are left alone as much as possible. The empty space remains undocumented. Questions are discouraged, not answered, because institutions are not built to confront places that do not behave like places. And the most unsettling possibility, the one no official explanation can address, is this: that the Naish 1 floor does not exist in violation of the building. It exists because of it. A side effect of boundaries drawn too cleanly, of assumptions stacked too neatly, of spaces defined only by what they are meant to be used for. The building insists it has 40 floors. Reality, it seems, is willing to negotiate, and so the official explanation stands, not because it is complete, but because it is stable. It holds the structure together, even as something beneath it quietly refuses to be explained. A different kind of descent. It is tempting to describe what happens as a malfunction, a misnumbered floor, a corrupted system, a building with a secret. These explanations feel comforting because they preserve a familiar idea that reality is stable and errors come from within it. But the descent to Moij 1 does not behave like a failure. It behaves like a translation. Traditional descent is measured in distance. Meters traveled, floors passed, altitude lost. Elevators obey gravity, cables, and math. They move through space that already exists, following routes designed in advance. The Naish 1 descent ignores all of that. No distance is covered. No depth is gained. Nothing moves relative to anything else. and yet something undeniably changes. Those who have experienced it consistently describe the same realization afterward, not during the ride, not on the floor, but in the quiet moments that follow. They did not go down. They went away. The elevator does not take the body somewhere new. It leaves the body exactly where it is, contained, intact, measurable. What shifts instead is the framework that tells the body what here means. In ordinary life, location is an anchor. It defines context, limits possibility, narrows interpretation. You are where you are, and that fact excludes everywhere else. The Maish 1 descent loosens that anchor. It creates a temporary state where exclusion weakens, where the idea of this life stops insisting that it is the only valid configuration. That is why the sensations reported during the ride are not physical first, but cognitive, emotional, existential. The pressure behind the eyes, the quiet recognition, the sudden familiarity without memory. These are not side effects. They are the mechanism. The descent strips away the assumption that identity is fixed to a single timeline. It introduces, gently and without force, the possibility that a person is not a point, but a range, a cluster of outcomes that usually collapse into one. Usually. What one offers is not another world in the science fiction sense. It is not a parallel universe bustling with alternate histories. There are no cities, no crowds, no grand divergences. Instead, it is something far more intimate, a margin between choices, a place where decisions have not yet hardened into facts. The floor that doesn't exist does not show people what could happen. It shows them what almost did. That distinction matters. Possibility is abstract. Almost is personal. The memories people bring back are not heroic or dramatic. They are ordinary. Relationships formed or missed, careers pursued or abandoned, moments where one small choice tilted a life in a different direction. That is why the impact is so profound, because the descent does not reveal an impossible self. It reveals a plausible one, a version of you that makes sense, a version that feels close enough to grieve. This reframes the entire experience. The elevator is not a doorway to elsewhere. It is a hinge, a mechanism that briefly allows awareness to slip between adjacent outcomes, between lives separated not by physics, but by hesitation. This also explains why the descent cannot be forced. You cannot summon it with intention. You cannot recreate it through repetition. You cannot access it once you are searching for it. Because the state required for the descent is not curiosity, but openness. A moment where routine loosens its grip, where identity is not being actively defended, where the mind is just distracted enough to let something through. That is why the button appears when people are tired, stressed, emotionally unfocused, when they are present, but not entirely anchored. The descent does not pull people away from their lives. It catches them when they are already slightly unmoored. And this leads to a deeply uncomfortable implication. If the Nagas 1 descent is not a malfunction and not a location, then it is not bound to the building. The building is simply where it intersects. The elevator is simply the language it uses. Elevators are liminal machines by nature. They exist between floors, between destinations, between moments of arrival and departure. They suspend people briefly outside the logic of movement. That suspension is the opening. The building does not create the descent, it reveals it. Which raises a troubling question. How many other systems create similar openings? Unnoticed, undocumented, dismissed as coincidence? Airports, hospitals, highways at night, places designed for transition, not presence. Places where identity is temporarily procedural, checked in, logged, processed. The Nagas 1 descent suggests that reality has seams, but only where we stop paying attention to the stitching. This also explains why those who return cannot fully integrate what they experienced. They are not traumatized, they are expanded. They have seen that their life is one outcome among many that were viable until very recently, and that knowledge cannot be unlearned. It introduces comparison into existence, and comparison is corrosive. Not because it makes people unhappy, but because it destabilizes certainty. When you know, viscerally, that another version of you exists just beyond the margin, living a life that feels equally valid, then decisions stop feeling final. Regret changes shape. Hope becomes complicated. Even joy carries an echo. This is why some who return describe the descent as gentle, but cruel. It does not punish. It does not warn. It simply shows, and then sends you back. The descent ends without ceremony. The elevator resumes its role. The building continues functioning. Life goes on. But something essential has shifted. Not the world, the frame through which the world is interpreted. In this sense, the Knife One descent is not about escape or discovery. It is about perspective, a reminder that identity is not a single path, but a narrowing process. That every life is the result of countless small collapses, choices, hesitations, missed turns that usually go unnoticed, until one of them doesn't. And for a brief moment, in a quiet elevator with a button that shouldn't exist, the collapse reverses. Not enough to change the past, just enough to show that it could have been otherwise, that you didn't go down, you went elsewhere, and you came back carrying the weight of knowing that elsewhere is not far away at all. The next time you're in an elevator. The next time you're in an elevator, nothing will feel unusual at first. The doors will close with their familiar sound. The panel will light up in the order you expect. The numbers will behave. The space will feel ordinary, small, functional, forgettable. That is how it always begins. Elevators are designed to disappear from our attention. We step inside, press a button, and wait. They are pauses between intentions, moments we rarely examine. We check our phones. We rehearse conversations. We think about where we're going, not where we are. That inattention is the point. Stand there long enough, and you'll notice how easily your sense of location softens. You are no longer fully in the place you left, but not yet in the place you're going. For a few seconds, you exist in a kind of administrative space, counted, enclosed, and temporarily unmoored. Most of the time, nothing happens. But sometimes, very rarely, something does. You won't feel it announce itself. There will be no warning, no shift dramatic enough to trigger alarm. Just a subtle interruption in familiarity, a quiet moment where the elevator feels slightly more present than it should. That's when you should look at the panel, not casually, not searching, just noticing. If everything looks normal, you'll relax without realizing it. Your mind will settle back into routine. The elevator will continue its job, and the moment will pass without consequence. But if something is different, even slightly, you'll feel it before you understand it. A space where a button wasn't before, a number that feels out of place, a label that doesn't belong to any floor you know. Your first instinct will be to doubt yourself. You'll assume fatigue, reflection, imagination. You'll look away and back again, expecting the panel to correct itself. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. If the panel holds its shape, if the difference remains, you may feel a quiet pressure building behind the choice it presents. Not urgency, not fear. Invitation. This is where the experience diverges. Most people will ignore it. They will look down. They will scroll. They will let the elevator decide for them the way they always do. And that is not a mistake. Nothing is taken from them. They will arrive at their floor, step out, and continue their lives unchanged. But a few will hesitate. Not because they want adventure, not because they believe in anything unusual, because something about the moment feels personally addressed. If you are one of them, the choice will not feel like pressing a button. It will feel like acknowledging a question that has been waiting quietly in the background of your life. What if something else had happened? What if one moment had gone differently? What if the person you are is not the only version that makes sense? The elevator will not answer these questions. It will only respond to action. If you press the unfamiliar button, do not expect drama. The elevator will not punish you. It will not trap you. It will not announce what it is doing. It will behave as if this route has always existed. And that is the most important detail, because whatever happens next will not feel like trespassing. It will feel like remembering. If you do not press the button, nothing follows you out. There is no sense of loss, no feeling of being watched. Life continues, whole and intact. The experience does not punish refusal. It respects it. That too is a choice. But if you do press it, and if the elevator responds, understand this. You will come back. You will return to a floor that exists, to a world that recognizes you, to a life that continues without interruption. But you will not return untouched. You may notice it immediately, or it may take time. A memory that feels heavier than it should. A certainty you can't explain. A quiet grief for something you never had the language to miss before. Nothing will be taken from you. Something will be added, and once added, it cannot be removed. This is why the elevator does not chase people. It does not repeat itself. It does not offer guarantees. It does not appear on command. It offers exactly one thing, exactly once, when conditions align. Perspective. The knowledge that the life you are living is not inevitable, but it is real. That it is not the only version that could have existed, but it is the one you are responsible for now. Most people never encounter the moment. Most never notice the panel long enough to see the question being asked. And that is not a failure. It is simply how the world protects itself from being constantly reconsidered. But the next time you're in an elevator, alone, distracted, suspended between floors, pay attention to how easily your sense of certainty loosens. Because if a button appears that shouldn't exist, the most important thing is not whether you press it, it's whether you recognize what it represents. A reminder that your life is not a straight line, but a narrowing corridor of choices. That behind you are countless versions of yourself who almost happened. And ahead of you is only the version you continue choosing, moment by moment. The elevator will take you where you asked to go. The question is whether, for a brief moment, you're willing to acknowledge that you could have gone elsewhere and still return to stand exactly where you are now. Because sometimes the most unsettling journeys do not take us to another place. They take us one step sideways and back again, with just enough awareness to change how we stand in the space we already occupy.
Shadows crawl